historia de mi vida. Amé mucho una mujer de mi alma la más querida. Me traicionó la perdida, caramba, qué ingrato y mal proceder. Ella me hizo beber, ella me hizo un perdido. A la droga me tiré, amigo mío, y a la cárcel fui llevado. Los amigos me olvidaron, solo mi madre lloraba. A Dios pedía y rogaba que se salvara su hijo. Recuerden lo que les digo, que en la prisión y en la cama solo nuestra madre nos ama, caramba. No hay dinero, no hay amigo, linda Guajira, mi son te llama.
Guajira, el son te llama a bailar, a gozar. Guajira, el son te llama a bailar, a gozar. Guajira, el son te llama a bailar, a gozar. Guajira, el son te llama a bailar, a gozar. Y al piano, don Rubén González. Oye, compadre, mira quién viene por ahí, compadre. Barbarito Torres. Guajira, el son te llama a bailar, a gozar. Guajira, el son te llama a bailar, a gozar.
Las dos palabras que más me llenan de regocijo es cuando me dicen hijo, es cuando digo mamá.
Guajira, el son te llama a bailar, a gozar.
La madre es un surtidor de miel que nunca se cierra, es un astro en la tierra, brilla mucho más que el sol.
El son te llama a bailar, a gozar.
No le teme a la negrura del
Kikiribu, mandinga, kikiribu, kiribu, mandinga.
Greetings, everyone. We hope you are safe and healthy and well. Thank you so much for being with us today. Happy Pan-African Women's Day. Woo! This is a very, very exciting time. It's very, very exciting. We're going to continue to say it because this is one of our institutions that we like to celebrate, not only within this organization, the All African People's Revolutionary Party, but also within African people's context worldwide. We should be celebrating Pan-African Women's Day. And we especially want to highlight the importance of celebrating such a day because it allows us to push forward and to unlearn the centeredness of institutions that are set up and designed to promote capitalistic ideologies. And instead, we are celebrating an institution that promotes humanity, resisting and fighting back and taking control so that they can have the power and the resources and be able to make decisions for themselves without being punished because of their class status or their gender or their race or a combination, or maybe because they're differently abled or whatever that may look like. So, if you don't identify as a woman, we still encourage you to celebrate Pan-African Women's Day because Pan-African Women's Day honors all non-male African people who have and will continue to be doing work that impacts African people everywhere so that we can be charged to do the work that needs to be done and so that we can honor and address our ancestors who have come before us, allowing us to be sitting here trying to do this work in the best way that we know how because we have taken the baton from them and learned from them so that we can continue forward. So, of course, the All African People's Revolutionary Party would be remiss if we did not acknowledge our comrades, our beautiful family members of the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere, because without them, we are not able to broadcast specifically from this particular location. And so we do want to acknowledge our comrades of the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere because this land, all the way from the very top of Canada to the very bottom of Chile, this land is you all's land if you identify as an Indigenous person of the Western Hemisphere. And I am currently fitting within that frame that you all just talked about. I intentionally really appreciate how one of the practices we do within the All African People's Revolutionary Party is every time we have a meeting of any type, whether it's a committee meeting or whatnot, we always try to introduce each other on the call. And what we'll do is we'll ask people if they know the information of the name of the indigenous land that they're on to share that as a way of acknowledging the colonization that has taken place. So usually when it gets to the Mid-South or the Midwest, I'll jump in after we've heard from our other comrades from the continent, and then we hear from our comrades on the East, and then we kind of push into the Midwest. And I never know if that's Midwest and South or if it's just Midwestern Southern. So I just always jump in to make sure that I can go and not be skipped over. But I find pride in saying I am Shukura Umi, and I am located on Cherokee land, colonized as Memphis, Tennessee, because I think it's really important, just like we say Azania, colonized as South Africa, right? Same exact thing, right? Where we're acknowledging that a group of oppressors came in and made decisions about how things were going to be different and changed people, culture, ways of life, just because it worked better for them, that they could profit more off of those changes. But we fighting back means that we get to resist those changes. We get to resist the decision that made those changes. We get to resist promoting that decision. We don't have to continue to use these colonized terms. We can go back to calling things what they were before colonization was even a threat for us. So I'm so proud to say that I am on Cherokee land. This land is sacred, and I thank you all for allowing me to broadcast on your land from Cherokee land so that we can continue to do this work. And again, we would be remiss if we didn't acknowledge the struggle and the sacrifice that you all went through, that you're still going through, and that a lot of people just simply have no idea about, A, because they know not very much about the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere, but they also don't know much about the struggle. They don't know much about the Indian Removal Act. They don't know much about alcoholism and giving diseases to people by way of blankets. They're not really aware of the mass genocide that took place against our indigenous comrades. But we will continue to do this work. We are with you all. We want you to get your land back, and we know you are with us, and we appreciate you wanting us to get our land back as well. And the struggle will continue, but we are with you to the end. So we thank you all for allowing us to be in this space. Again, happy Pan-African Women's Day, everyone. This is such an amazing day to be alive. It's such an amazing day to celebrate so many things. And so I just want to start off by clarifying that I am not Comrade Ajamu, especially if this is your first time joining us. My name is Shukura. Ajamu and I are related. I am his child, but Comrade Ajamu usually joins us for these weekly broadcasts and was unable to attend today. So I am going to humbly do the best I can to hold down the fort and allow us to be motivated to celebrate Pan-African Women's Day as best we can. And we look forward to seeing Comrade Ajamu next weekend when he returns with us on Sunday. So again, welcome. If this is your first time joining us, if it's not your first time, welcome back. We missed you and we hope that you have had a good week. We are so excited to celebrate Pan-African Women's Day, and I'll continue to say this, you all, but if you did not catch the webinar, the earlier broadcast that took place earlier today, understand that it is available on YouTube. I just looked it up. You don't need a special link. You don't need to register for a special Zoom or anything like that. The actual, broadcast was recorded, and I just typed in on YouTube Pan-African Women's Day 2024, and it popped right up. And so I just want to make sure that folks know, and I'll continue to be saying these plugs throughout this next hour. Definitely check that out if you didn't get a chance to check it out. I know that we will have many in-person events over the next couple of weeks commemorating Pan-African Women's Day. But if you didn't get a chance to watch the webinar, the international webinar, we strongly, strongly recommend you do so. That information that was shared to me was enlightening and enhancing in terms of me seeking information and education, especially because the theme was so interesting as they were able to tie in gender oppression and environmental injustice. And so just when we think about the connection between gender oppression and all the natural disasters that are taking place, the climate change rates, all of these different things, it's so interesting because we think about these things as separate entities, but they're not separate. In both cases, we have a group of people, or in this case, land, atmosphere, earth, that is not being valued or respected, even the solar system not being valued or respected, being exploited for the resources, being completely deforested and cutting down trees that we rely on, that animals rely on, that we all need for oxygen to have clear air that we breathe. And so just thinking more about all of that, there was so many good, we had 2 different panels today, and there were so many great panelists who shared actual correlations between the oppression of non-male people as it related to the environment. There were so many people who identified as, doing environmental justice or working in the environmental racism department and had more of a deeper understanding of how these things are all tied in. And most importantly, how when the environment is under attack, African women, African femme presenting people, and now marginalized folks of African descent are most likely to be impacted politically, economically, socially, financially. Their children are more likely to be impacted. And we know, based on Dr. Kwame Nkrumah's saying, the degree of a country's political education can best be measured by the education of its women. So if we know that Dr. Nkrumah said that, then we also know that if it's impacting non-male African people in all those different ways I mentioned, we also know that it's impacting the family unit, which means it's impacting the partner. It's impacting the community. It's impacting the neighborhood when greed takes over, when capitalism takes over, when imperialism takes over. It is impacting health. It is impacting livelihood. It is impacting the ability to live a healthy life. All of that is impacted when we throw out humanization and bring in greed and corruption. That's what happens. And so we usually have the All African People's Revolutionary Party who sponsors this event. And as I said, it's usually with Comrade Ajamu Umi and myself. I do want to give a shout out to Ajamu and say that this is actually going on, I think his 41st or 42nd year being in this organization. So definitely 40 years strong of being an organizer with the All African People's Revolutionary Party. And, you know, just so we're clear, the All African People's Revolutionary Party is a revolutionary, independent, mass Pan-African political party. We are based out of Africa. So even if you were to log into the webinar today, you would notice that our rooted time is based on UTC, which is based on one of the time zones that is relevant on the western part of Africa. Everything we do is rooted in Africa. Our chapters are rooted in Africa. Our conferences are rooted in Africa because we understand as African people that the problem that we're facing did not start in the diaspora. It started on the continent when the continent was attacked, when the continent was ravaged and rummaged through, when the continent was exploited and when resources were stolen. So the problems that African people are facing are not going to be addressed outside of the continent. We have to start where the problem first initiated itself, which is why we are organizing on the ground on African soil. And so this means that we would also be basing what we're doing, events and whatnot, on the ground on African soil. And so just thinking more about that, our objective as an organization is Pan-Africanism. And how we define Pan-Africanism is a one unified socialist Africa, meaning we very much believe that under a socialist Africa, no such thing would exist as capitalism, clearly because socialism is the next stage after capitalism. So you can't have both systems at one time. But even beyond that, we acknowledge that under socialism, we don't have systems of oppression because we're trying to leave all of that in the capitalist realm, and we're not bringing any of that. It's not rolling over. So we're not going to be bringing in white supremacy. We're not going to be bringing in homophobia. We're not going to be bringing in racism or ableism. We're not going to be bringing in xenophobia or Islamophobia. None of those things have space under a scientific socialist Africa. Patriarchy especially, it cannot come. It has no space because what we're trying to build is something very different from what is currently existing, which means we're not going to be using any of the current rollovers that are existing because they haven't done anything to help African people. If nothing else, they have done so much more in terms of dehumanizing African people and reminding people who are not African that we are not even fully humans. That's what one of the panelists said today. Still having that argument in 2024 for people to actually see us as full human beings, right? To see us as people that deserve respect, right? And so, you know, this is a really good point that we make. And so that's why we're thinking more about that in terms of how we can build our socialist Africa. And we have been working really well to do that, establishing more chapters on the continent, making sure that we're working together with our sibling organizations that are already on the continent doing the work so that we don't necessarily need to create a brand new chapter of our organization if we can just kind of connect and collaborate and unify with organizations that already exist. And then we're using Dr. Kwame Nkrumah's guide for this. So he wrote this book many, many moons ago called the Revolutionary Warfare Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare. And we have been using this handbook to kind of guide how we're going to go about doing this. This handbook gives great advice, step by step, on how one would go about establishing an organization, specifically within the context of what Nkrumah was thinking of when he was one of the co-founders of the All African People's Revolutionary Party so many years ago. And so, as I said, we give a shout out to Comrade Ajamu. Thank you for allowing us the space to be here, Comrade, and we'll see you next week. And we're going to jump right in to why we should celebrate Pan-African Women's Day. And you may be slightly confused if you joined us last week, because we did broadcast on Pan-African Women's Day last week as well. But I want to clarify, we actually broadcast on some amazing soldiers, African soldiers, non-male African soldiers who had needed recognition for the work that they had done to help change the conditions of African people everywhere. So how does that seminar differ from the one today? Well, the one today, we're not so much going to focus on some non-male African folks that we should have in our repertoire. We're going to focus more on what today's webinar was about and how it relates to the struggle of African people, because I think it still is a necessary conversation to have where we're not really making the connection. So hopefully we'll be able to help you make some of those connections. And, you know, we start with understanding, this again came up in the webinar today, we start with understanding how we cannot achieve one unified socialist Africa. We can't even achieve for Africans to become free. We're not going to be able to get our land back. We're not going to be able to do any of those things if we do not acknowledge that we have to address patriarchy and sexism within, our own communities. We have to acknowledge that. And more than acknowledging, we have to eradicate and completely annihilate those systems of oppression. They can't exist. They cannot exist. And so when we think more about that, we should be able to understand that African women make up 51% of the world African population wide. So it is so clear that the African liberation cannot exist and will not have a chance to exist without women's liberation. And what we mean by that is there's a reason that we call ourselves the All African People's Revolutionary Party. If you'll notice, we're not the Some African People's Revolutionary Party. We're not the Male African People's Revolutionary Party. We're not even the able-bodied African People's Revolutionary Party or anti-queer. That's none of those things are what we are, because we understand that this capitalist system is so massive, you all. I was talking to a friend of mine today, and I was describing to them how social media influencers are so wrapped up in the capitalist system. I'm not even sure if they create content and create videos for pleasure anymore, because I think it's more of a means to an end for them to keep their bills paid at this point. And I was talking to my friend about how it seemed to me that when I first started watching some of these videos by certain people, no, I don't know their names because I didn't necessarily subscribe, but it's interesting to me how when I first started watching their videos, there was something I liked about their personality. There was something I liked about their demeanor. So I liked their video. One person in particular works as a mental health therapist and works the graveyard shift and has 3 or 4 children, and just shows videos of her trying to keep up her mental health while she's taking care of the house, cooking for her children, cleaning up, doing all the things while she's also trying to get sleep throughout the day so that she can end up going to work that night, right? And at the beginning, it was so healing, and it was great to hear her talking about mental health and great to hear her talking about how she prioritizes her children. She loves her children. She's still dealing with some birth issues, complications that she had. So we're thankful that she's here with us and that she made it through. And I think that she is not in a good space anymore. And I think that, you know, it could be argued that she may have lost it, because the last video I just saw from her, She literally said she was reading the comments, and that's the other thing is people are so judgmental and tacky, but that's also a part of capitalism, right? It's okay for you to pass judgment on other people and to make you think you're better than them and you're more elitist because your house is cleaner when we don't know what people are going through, and we can't necessarily judge someone's house for the array that it's in unless we acknowledge how capitalism has contributed to that. I'm not saying individually that we don't have responsibilities, but if you can't even maintain income, then how are you going to be able to afford cleaning products and cleaning rags to clean up your house if your job is constantly laying you off? If you're constantly worrying about paying your bills, if you're overwhelmed because you're dealing with different systems of oppression every day, it can make it pretty challenging for you to be able to stop what you're doing and prioritize your house, not to mention all the different distractions that exist because that's what capitalism is geared to do. That's what commercials are for, to make you distracted about what your focal point is so that you can start to think about ways to spend more money, right? Even right now, I've paused my TV so I can do this seminar, and there's a Capital One commercial for a credit card, and it's paused. It's not even playing right now. But it's just interesting to me how you don't even have like a black screen when you're streaming things anymore. Even when you're streaming, I still need to push my product towards you because I hope that if I can show you my product, you might be inclined to buy it. And if you buy it, then I can get some of your money. And it's just very, very interesting to me. So I'm saying all of this to say, you all, when we don't acknowledge that the women's liberation needs to be prioritized, what we're doing is we're allowing capitalism to win. Because if you're not acknowledging that African women, marginalized genders, and non-femme, and femme presenting African folks deserve to have respect, they deserve to be treated as people who deserve respect. They deserve to be acknowledged. They deserve to not be catcalled. They deserve to not be dismissed, to not be cut off, to not be ignored, to not be put in a position where their ideas and their feelings are not valid, that they're unstable, that they're not logical, all these things that we experience on a day-to-day basis, which a lot of times African men experience too from a white supremacy standpoint. But I don't know if African men understand that they're now taking the same thing, the same treatment that was done to them, and pushing it to non-male African folks. I'm not sure if that connection is being made. But what I'm saying is, if we were able to really change the way we treat folks within our own communities, and it starts with uprooting patriarchy. This is what I'm talking about. Not being so inclined to cut off African folks when they're talking, specifically non-male folks, because that's a good benefit of patriarchy, is you are taught to believe that your words are more valued and important than African non-male folks. And we know that that's simply not true. Just because you don't think this what somebody has to say is important doesn't mean that they don't deserve to be heard. We see this taking place in hospital settings where we have non-male African folks who complain about not being heard. And we see that happening with health complications, where if someone had just listened to this person, they probably wouldn't have had to go into labor early, or they probably wouldn't have had to have surgery early. They probably wouldn't have had to have the stomach issue that they had if someone had just listened to them. But we know from time and time again, we have James Marion Sims, we have all these different folks who have put out racist lies about how African non-male people experience pain. And so because of it, those type of assumptions have started to grow and evolve over time to where people are now assuming that what they have to say is not important. Their words are not important. They don't know what they're talking about. Oh, you're just making that up. Oh, it's probably just your cycle. I mean, all these different things, but it's not your body. So how do you know? It's not your body. So how do you know? And this is why we're saying, you all, if we don't deal with this women's liberation, Africa will never be free. Because what's going to happen is, if we don't deal with the women's liberation, if we don't deal with marginalized, femme presenting African women being free, and I'm saying free from suffering from oppression, sexism, toxic masculinity, patriarchy within our own communities, we all can address sexism, patriarchy, toxic masculinity outside with the oppressor of our communities, but we need to first clean house, pun intended. We need to first clean house inside our communities. We need to acknowledge that some of us are promoting patriarchy. We need to acknowledge that some of us we have it ingrained in us. And I'm saying some, but it's really all of us. And that's not by choice. That's because we were born into it. That's why it's a system of oppression, because it is something that you have been geared to understand. When you were in the womb, you were exposed to it, whether you knew it or not. And when you came out of the womb, you were still exposed to it. From the moment that your color was assigned to you based on your gender, that's patriarchy. From the moment that the toy was taken out of your hand because that was too girly for you to play with or too masculine for you to play with, patriarchy, patriarchy, patriarchy. And we still see it today. We still see it today, where we have people like my grandmother, may she rest in peace. But I remember she would say things to my mom, or at least my mom is sharing these stories with me now, where she would say things like, well, the reason you all got a divorce, my parents are divorced. The reason you all got a divorce is because you didn't iron his sheets, his shirts. And I'm like, ain't nobody got time to be. But anyways, but that's her upbringing, right? That's her philosophy. When she was coming up, that's what non-male people were supposed to do. So I mean, we can understand that to some extent, but it's interesting how it's lopsided. It's interesting that we don't expect African males to do things for their partners, but the expectation is you need to maintain the house, you need to keep the children upkept, clean, fed, brushed, manicured. You need to make sure the animal is taken care of. You might even have a job in the process. You need to do all these things, but we don't need to think about your mental health, A. We don't need to think about what your needs are, B. And we don't need to acknowledge that you're still suffering from a system of oppression, even though we're seeing you as a means to an end right now, which is also a form of patriarchy, because I think the idea of patriarchy means not assigning value to a non-male person because they are not valuable, right? And I think that's part of the problem when we don't really stop to think about what would happen if the housework just didn't get done. If you didn't have towels that were washed for 2 weeks, what would you do? Do you even have enough towels to last you past 2 weeks? I did an experiment one time and I can't go more than a week without washing my towels. So just thinking about if the person didn't wash those towels, how would you dry yourself off? How would you dry your hands? How would you go forward? If all the personable underwear and things like that weren't washed, what would you do? Right? And so the dishes, if the dishes weren't washed and if you did not have paper goods to eat off of, how would you eat your food? No silverware, because all the silverware is dirty. So I'm just saying, like, these are the things that we have to think about, you all, because this liberation, it's not going to be sustainable. Like I said, we can't bring anything old from previous systems of oppression. So capitalism is a great example of a system of oppression. And capitalism, imperialism, those are entities that give birth to patriarchy. So we're not bringing patriarchy, it's not rolling over from the other system. It cannot and it will not have space in our socialist Africa. And really, what we need to do is we need to protect socialist Africa so that once we do get control of our resources back, the neo-colonial people won't have a way to re-threaten us and try to take that land back once again, which means we have no room for error. We need to be tight. We need to be linked up. We need to be connected. We need to acknowledge that everyone has a skill. Everyone has something to offer. Everyone has a part to play. Everyone has a part to play, whether you're male, non-binary, or femme presenting. Everyone has a part to play. Woman identifying, everyone has a part to play. So just understanding that a little bit more, I think is really important, because if we don't acknowledge patriarchy and sexism, then we're doing the same thing that we are trying to get the oppressor to stop doing. We are oppressing African non-male people by still encouraging patriarchal thoughts, patriarchal values, sexist thoughts, sexist values, ways of life. We're still encouraging environments where those two systems of oppression can thrive. And what we need to do is cut them down and dig up the root of the trunk and cut it up and burn it in the fireplace. That's what I would say, right? So we have to ask ourselves, So then if we're getting into liberation, what does that mean? Well, when we say liberation, what we are talking about is we're trying to help people understand that there needs to be an interruption, if you will, within the capitalist system. And I do mean the global capitalist system. There needs to be a halt. There needs to be a blockage. There needs to be a way where capitalism can no longer maintain itself, meaning private corporations are not in a position to keep making money because we have found a way to stop that ability for that input output system to continue functioning. And one way to do that is by helping colonized people get their land back. You have to ask yourself, how does capitalism thrive? Usually, it's because private corporations are profiting off of something and they are stopping by any means necessary to keep that profit driving. But how are they getting the materials to be profited off of? They probably stole them. They probably stole them from a colonized land somewhere. They're probably stealing resources from one land and maybe using another land to clean those resources. We can think of the diamonds that are being mined in Africa and then shipped over to Israel so that they can be cleaned there. And then we have companies like De Beers and K Jewelers and all these other diamond companies that are now buying these diamonds that need to be cleaned there. And so if we think more about that, that's a perfect example of capitalism at its best. So if we were to help Palestinian people get their land back, well, now the diamonds can't be cleaned there anymore because Palestinians understand that's a contradiction and they are working with us to help us get our land back. So now you're not stealing our diamonds anymore, which is also an impact to capitalist entities where you're no longer able to profit off of that anymore. And in the meantime, that money should be coming back into the African people's pocket because we as African people will have control of our land. We'll be able to decide how those diamonds are profited. And maybe, just maybe, we'll be able to advance the struggle for African people in a different way, where we won't have to suffer in poverty anymore, where we won't have to suffer with rickets and spinal issues and other health issues that our people are suffering from on the continent. We won't have to suffer from having diabetes and hypertension and all these other health issues that we are chronically known to have. Breast cancer, cervical cancer, all of these things, maternal mortality rates. We can find a way to put an end to all of that. And we may be working with Cuba in the process, and that's okay because Cuba's got our back and we have got theirs. But we have got to figure out how to use a socialist lens to look at ways to fix this stuff, which means not relying on capitalism. That's what that means. And so if we were to interrupt capitalism, this means that a revolutionary change would develop itself. And we would be able to see a total liberation where Africa is unified. We want to continue to say unified Africa because that's another outcome of colonialism and neocolonialism that we now have to address and fix, is that we have all these colonial barriers and borders, if you will, within the continent where we have people that are separated out because, you know, you're in Senegal and you speak French, and I'm in Ghana and I speak English because you were colonized by the French and I was colonized by the British. And we don't want any of that anymore. We don't want no European entity having any space on our land. Get out, get out, get out, get out. Take your language and go. Take your clothing and go. Take your food and go. Get out, get out, get out, get out, get out. We don't want you here. We never did, and you were not welcome, so get out. We're going to continue to cook our own food. We're going to bring back our own language. We're going to bring back our terms. We're not going to use your terms anymore. We don't need to use your language anymore because we're trying to refute neocolonialism. We're trying to resist neocolonialism by any means necessary. So this means that we're in a better position to connect the continent instead of the division of the continent. We're able to relink and connect one another. We're able to help people understand that it really is one unified socialist Africa, or as Dr. Nkrumah said, a United States of Africa. And so that means that we're able to make some connections. Now, is it going to happen overnight? Are we all just going to speak one language overnight? No, no, it's going to take time. It's going to take time to get there, but we will get there. We will get there. And so in doing that, that's why organizing will be so important, helping people to make those connections. Apologies, you all. I'm just trying to make sure that my slides are where I need them to be. They were skipping ahead a little bit. So that's how we're able to make those connections, because now we're in a position where we can have conversations where unification is the root, unification is the center, unification is the priority. And then from there, we can see how other things will start to build within that, right? So this brings us to Pan-African Women's Day, which again, you all, please make sure you go to the YouTube page. It's not even a specific YouTube page. Just go to the main YouTube page. If you did not catch the webinar today, just go ahead and type in Pan-African Women's Day 2024. And the restream should pop right up for you. That's what happened to me when I did it in my phone. Definitely reach out to our website, aaprp-intl.org. If you need some assistance, we probably have the link posted there as well. But I know for sure you can access it on YouTube because I just double checked that. So definitely watch that restream. But the question remains, so why Pan-African Women's Day? Well, we understand that patriarchy is an appendage, as I described earlier, of capitalism and imperialism. So that really means that until we address patriarchy, sexism, toxic masculinity, until we address those entities, we are in serious danger of our scientific socialist new way of life being manicured and smooth and pure. We're in serious danger of not respecting one another. We are in serious danger of oppressing one another. And I want to be very clear. I've been focusing up to this point on the impacts of patriarchy on non-male African people. But let's be clear, patriarchy impacts everyone, just like white supremacy impacts everyone. So patriarchy impacts African males and European males just as much as it impacts African non-males and European non-males as well. The system of patriarchy puts so much pressure on African males, making it so that you need to be functioning at top level to provide for your family. And, God help us if you lose your job or get laid off. That's not a representation of the system. That's a representation that you failed your family, which could not be further from the truth, because as I just pointed out, the system is always letting people go. The system is always firing people, because if you are a threat to capitalism functioning and you have found a way to stop private corporations from making money, then your job is no longer of value because you are replaceable. And they will find somebody else who can do the job better and faster and smarter than you, and they'll keep going. They don't have to care about your family. They don't have to care that you just had a newborn. They don't have to care that you're sick. They don't have to care that you need the medical benefits. They don't care. 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 Because we don't live in a system where people care, or people matter and people care, I should say. We don't live in that system. Now, if you live in Cuba, then I'm not talking to you, because that is a system where people matter, but not in the US, not in the diaspora in many places. So if we think more about that, what we need to understand is patriarchy puts a lot of pressure on African men. It puts a lot of pressure even on European men and men in general, making it so that you have every ounce of energy that should be put in to make sure that you are providing for your family, that you're providing for your partner. And if mishaps take place that you weren't counting on, then you have to find a way to try to reach into your savings and deal with those mishaps. The problem, though, is that no one talks about how challenging it is to actually put money in savings and leave it there. Again, because that's an outcome of capitalism, right? It's almost impossible unless you're making, I don't know, 18 figures, like some of these politicians we're about to talk about. But it's impossible for you to be able to put money in savings and actually keep it in there. Because the minute you put your money in savings, now you're feeling good, you're proud of yourself because that money is in savings, you haven't touched it. And then what happens is you're driving and you realize that your child's car seat is not buckling the way it's supposed to. And you might be able to fix the buckle, but is that something you want to risk because you know you have to go to the park tomorrow with your kid? Or do you probably need to stop what you're doing and go get a new car seat? Well, that's assuming that you can get to the store before you drive over a pothole. And now you need to either get a spare tire, replace the tire, patch the side of the tire that the nail got in, whatever the case may be, right? So before you know it, now you're reaching into that savings to get that money out because that new car seat and that new tire is not cheap. It's not cheap. It's not cheap. And I wouldn't even argue these are things that you don't need. I would argue these are things that you do need. But what about the things that you don't need that are still relevant? What about the fact that your child may want to play a sport? What about the fact that your child may want to start to play an instrument? Those things cost money. And you want to make sure that you're giving them the best experiences that life has to offer. So you try to do what you can, but some people would argue that's not a necessity. Well, I think it depends on who's making that assessment, right? I do think that it's important to acknowledge that just to live a healthy, happy life is very expensive. It's expensive emotionally, it's expensive mentally, it's expensive physically, spiritually, it's expensive. And so, again, like living under a system of patriarchy makes it really, really difficult for one to save money, for one to provide for their family, for one to not rely on other people. And they also make you out to be the criminal and the victim if you do rely on your family. It's not attractive if you need help. You should be able to be independent and, excuse me, pay all your bills and live your life by yourself. And so then if you do end up needing help, then that shows that you're a failure. It shows that you're mooching. It shows that you're not responsible. I mean, there's all these different ways for capitalism to make you out to be the villain, when in actuality, it's okay to get help. That's the collectivist way. It's okay to get support. That's the collectivist way. It's okay to not live independently and in shame of that, because as collectivist people, we understand that we need to rely on one another, but also support and help one another. That's exactly what socialism is it allows each and every one of us to see what our skill sets are, what our values are, what our talents are, if you will, and then we're able to all bring all of our skills together so that we can do what needs to be done. Some of us may be really good at putting programs together and creating the Google documents like today for the webinar so that we have the scripts that we need so that the translators can be able to just translate from one document. But you also have people that might be able to be really good at keeping time and they're communicating with people on the back channels to make sure that the program is functioning smoothly. We have other people that are really good about putting things in the Zoom chat and getting people hyped up and reminding them to join some organization that is working for justice. We have other people that are on the front line that are facilitating the panels, or they might be emceeing the program. They may be the keynote. They may be one of the panelists, right? And so my point is we have all these people who are really good at these jobs. And to me, it makes more sense for all of us to come together and bring all of our gifts together so that we can help the people get free and organize and free Mother Africa. Instead of just keeping your skills to yourself, because you may be really good at one skill that I'm not good at, but I can guarantee you I bring something to the table because I can do this, this, and this. And if you can do this, this, and this, then we're able to really put our forces together. And that's, again, a collectivist approach, right? So we have to think that really the only solution to systemic oppression is mass organization. It really is the only way, because in doing that, now we're creating a space where none of us, we have a zero tolerance for systems of oppression that promote and impede on African men, because we acknowledge that patriarchy is a toxic system that you all have to suffer from as well. We also acknowledge, and we need you all to acknowledge, that patriarchy is a toxic system that we have to suffer from. So why are we allowing that system to torment us? We should eradicate it so that neither one of us, including non-binary people, none of us have to deal with that system anymore. None of us should have to deal with toxic masculinity. It serves no purpose. It has no space. What good has it done for humanity? Answer me that. Absolutely nothing. So it must go. Because in this new age of scientific socialist Africa, we only need entities that are serving the mass people. We only need entities that are serving the mass people. And if it's not serving all of us, then it's got to go. It has no space. It has no space. It's almost like a spring cleaning ideologically, if you will, right? It's got to go. So then we can think more about that and understand understand, well, what does that mean in terms of how we think about systems that will continue to promote patriarchy, systems that will continue to promote toxic masculinity and sexism? Well, we have to understand that under capitalism, you have this individualistic framework, right? This individualistic mindset. So if we understand that capitalism is individualistic, this would explain why we have more of an individual bourgeoisie position, right? And so we see, different politicians who are benefiting from that. They're benefiting from this individualized perspective. They're benefiting from the fact that it makes it seem like they did everything they could on their end. And that's why they got to where they are, because of all the hard work that they did, while not taking into account the privilege that they had along the way, not taking into account the backs that they stood on to get to where they are, not taking into account all their ancestors who died for them to be in the positions they're in. But they are not continuing the legacy of their ancestors. They are actually turning their back on their ancestors and promoting a US imperialist world that does not value humanity. It does not value humanity. People are asking me, what are my thoughts now that Kamala has accepted the bid and is running for president? And I laugh because it's interesting to me that I guess people think, I have an opinion about this, but I tell them, well, when I think of Kamala Harris, I think of a person who is in an organization where the acronym is BASIC. And I might mess up the full name, but from what I remember reading about in our brochure for being anti-Zionist within the All African People's Revolutionary Party, BASIC stands for Black Americans, specifically something. Oh, Black Americans in support of Israel and something else. I can't remember the C. I apologize. But that basically means, pun intended, that there are Africans in petty bourgeoisie and bourgeoisie positions, like Kamala Harris, like Michelle and Barack, and they are in support of Israel continuing to bomb and kill Palestinian people. They are in support of Israel stealing diamonds from Africa and cleaning them in Israel, which is really occupied Palestine land. They are in support of Zionists taking over and having way too much power and control in this world. They are in support of Palestinian people not being able to decide when they leave their houses because it is too dangerous and they are under attack. BASIC is not an organization that one should be proud of being a part of. But yet that is a classic position that a lot of African politicians take, because you can't be a politician within the US unless you're in support of Israel. Because Zionism has made it very clear that Israel and Israel is in cahoots with Europe, which is in cahoots with the US, and all three of them are dependent on one another so that they can keep exploiting resources, keep exploiting people, keep kidnapping people, keep stealing people, keep making people work more than what they are earning, or even not earning anything at all, so that they can all continue to benefit off of what they're relying on. It's a triangle. You have Europe, you have Israel, and then you have America. And so just an understanding that you can't be a politician within the US and be African and be in support of occupied Palestine. It simply is an oxymoron. It doesn't exist, because that would mean that you're trying to cut off one of the appendages of how America is making their money. I really appreciate Comrade Ajamu, because he's been trying to make more connections so that people can understand how occupied Palestine really will benefit everyone. But if people really understood that, I think they would get more aligned with it. And so, when we went to UC Davis and we were supporting the encampments, we were walking around campus talking to people and just asking people, how has the year been financially for them? And a lot of people are struggling. We see different people creating videos about TikTok and how they're trying to find creative ways to save money, how they're trying to find more resources where they can shop at cheaper stores and get the same kind of food for their family, but at a cheaper price. I mean, we see this. There's a lot of that happening, right? More people are taking to bicycles instead of driving so they don't have to pay for gas, all of these things. And so we think about that and then we understand. So what that really means is you're struggling financially, but do we understand that, part of the money that comes out of our paycheck that we could be using is going to support the US military? And what are they doing with that money? They're using that money to create bombs and weapons and guns and bullets and all of these things that they're shipping over to Israel to kill Palestinian people, that they're shipping over these bombs to kill Palestinian children, putting bombs in toys and making sure these toys are available for children to pick up and whatnot. And so, as devastating and as disturbing as that is to say, I'm sure it's disturbing for you to hear because this is the reality, people. And what we're trying to get people to understand is Basic is not an organization that you want to support. It's also not something that we want to be proud of. So we shouldn't be supporting politicians that are in support of children being bombed. That's what we're trying to say. We're also trying to make it clear that when we think about what's happening in Palestine, when we think about this bourgeoisie position and how it is impacting people, we should understand that the other piece of this is none of us are in positions of power where we can actually do something about it individually. But if we join organizations that are working for justice, we have a better chance of fighting back. We have a better chance because then we can link up with the different Palestinian organizations that are fighting back, whether it's Students Justice for Palestine, Palestinian Liberation Organization. We even have other Arabian organizations that we're working with. We have new organizations that we're starting to establish relationships with, some that are based out of Australia that are Pan-Africanist in nature, some that are based out of India, and they're organizing against caste systems that are connected to white supremacy. I mean, we're seeing this idea of people organizing all around the world. So it's not something that's impossible, but this piece about promoting patriarchy, again, that's a part of the bourgeoisie class. That's what you're supposed to do because patriarchy comes from capitalism. So we've got to continue to do that. And we've got to make sure that that is enabled within that. Because I guess the point I'm making is when people ask my opinion about Kamala taking the bid, I have no opinion because it's not like the world is going to change. We saw when Barack was in office that people thought we were in this post-racial war and that Africans were not going to be under attack, and yet we still saw Africans getting gunned down during the quarantine. Now we're still seeing that, only it's sort of increased a little bit. I'm also noticing that there's a trend where African people are most likely to be unhoused, and African women, marginalized, femme presenting, have an even higher rate of being unhoused than African men. So to me, it doesn't matter if Kamala gets in office as the president or if she's in office as the VP. None of the conditions that African people are impacted with in the US have changed since they got into office 4 years ago. So it makes it really hard for me to believe that people are the priority. And we know that that's not true because that's not the American way. The American way is to make sure that private corporations make that money. The American way is to make sure that people can assign classist values where they don't want to live in that neighborhood because there's too many unhoused people. Where classist people can make values where they can decide that they can call the police if an unhoused person is, spending too much time and making them uncomfortable. But in actuality, we never stop to ask ourselves, but why do we live in a world where there's so many shelterless people? Why do we live in a world where people can't afford shelter? No one stops to ask those questions. And more importantly, it doesn't seem that people care enough beyond themselves to want to do something about it. So these are the things that we have to think about, you all. And it's going to continue where we're going to be reforming the bourgeoisie European feminist movements. I don't have much to say about that. I will just say that when we think about feminism, we should really unpack, is it rooted in a colonial influence or is it rooted in something else? Because when I think about feminism, I have tainted views where it is completely rooted in European impacts, which means when I think about feminism, I don't even feel like it includes African non-male people. So I don't even acknowledge that feminism is something that can even benefit African non-male people. But I think the question becomes, how do African people redefine this term? Do we start to use womanism? Do we start to use Pan-African feminism? Do we start to use our own terms that we have started to make up? Because again, we are de-centering colonialism, right? And then last but not least, so we understand that, patriarchy is not going to end under this capitalist regime, but women and marginalized gender folks, we have got to make sure that we're not confused that just because a femme presenting person might win the election and get into office, that does not mean that that's going to change how patriarchy is viewed, because it still will show that patriarchy is still alive and well. And we'll see more of that coming out as people start to express their anger of a woman, feminine presenting person running for office. We'll also see more of that come out as we get closer to November. So, there's that. And then it's also the piece about, not even having access to the same kind of power because of the fact that this person doesn't identify as a male. And so we just have all these different things. I'll also say because they don't identify as a European white male, there's that too. But we just have all these things. And so as we prepare to close, I'll go over this slide really quickly and then we'll wrap up with our closing slide. But we do have a pathway for victory. So we want to give a shout out to all women unions or components of organizations that are highlighting women, femme presenting, and marginalized genders. And so, we think of UDMU within the PAIGC. We think of POWO within the PAC. Of course, we have the All African Women's Revolutionary Union within the All African People's Revolutionary Party. We have the OAU, the Organization of African Women within the MPLA. So we have these different examples of organizations that over time have understood, we have really got to create a women's union so that we can address the social revolutions that are at play, so that we can address this question of gender, so that we can address this question of not just patriarchy and toxic masculinity, sexism, but also homophobia, transphobia, xenophobia, Islamophobia. We need to kind of have these conversations. And so our way to victory is acknowledging that non-male people have a right and an opportunity to organize, that male people and non-binary people should be backing and supporting non-male people as they continue in this fight. Because again, we're not going to be able to address all of our oppressions if we don't start in-house and address the ones that we don't even see as oppressive natures, right? We need to address those. And so we'll continue with this work where we can win the hearts and minds of African people because we are building solidarity, because we are supporting revolutionary institutions like Pan-African Women's Day, and also the women's unions or the non-binary unions where African people are being highlighted and supported, where our conditions and our realities, our experiences, our struggles, our sacrifices, all of that can be addressed. We're continuing to do this work. And like I said, these spaces are open for males to come into because even males need to understand that they have a role to play and how we organize against these things, which means you're not just coming to the main meetings, but you're coming into these women's spaces as well, these non-binary marginalized spaces as well. And you have humility as you try to figure out how you can support us as well. And so with that, we thank you all so much. If you are local in Sacramento, Oakland, the Southern California area, and you want to drive up to Sacramento, we have a Black August and Pan-African Women's Day event coming up on August 17th in Sacramento, California. So the flyer is there for more information. We also have the webinar for the Pan-African Women's Day that was broadcasted earlier today. As I said, you all can go to the YouTube page and check that out, but you can also go to our website, www.aaprp-intl.org, and get more information from that. If you are interested, as I said, we have many more Pan-African Women's Day events that are coming up. So we would humbly ask that you consider donating if you have not already done so. We've got Venmo, which is at A-APRP, or we've got PayPal, which is at AAPRP. And then please join us next week, you all, at the same time, same place on Sunday, August 4th. We're going to be commemorating the Black Liberation Army and how it freed Assata Shakur. Okay, so please make sure you join us for that. Make sure you check out Comrade Ajamu's book, A Guide for Organizing Defense Against White Supremacist, Patriarchal, and Fascist Violence. This book and the sales from these books help him to raise money, where we're actually going to be starting some self-defense trainings in the Sacramento area with the local work study circle there. And so using that money to pick up resources to help with the defense trainings and whatnot, the ideological reading, the ink, the paper it costs to print out those readings, all of those things. And then, you know, if you're still interested in donating books for the Burkina Faso book project, here's the QR code for that. And then last but not least, if you want more seminars, more broadcasts, more information on Pan-Africanism within this organization's context, you can check out this QR code that gives you more connections on different broadcasts and seminars that are taking place. So with that, we thank you all so much. We hope you stay safe. Thank you for being with us. And please, please, please remember to celebrate Pan-African Women's Day. Tell as many people as you can about the webinar broadcast. But beyond that, remember that the capitalist America imperialist world is crumbling. So we are doing something right, and you have to stay protected. You have to stay engaged. You have to join an organization that's working for justice, or donate money or support by sending food or whatever you can. But remember that we are winning. The system won't tell you that because they're too busy trying to make you scared and making you think that you're invaluable and you don't matter. But oppressed people are rising up. We are fed up, we've had enough, and we are fighting back. So if you have not already joined our fight, do so, because we need all hands on deck if we're going to win and help colonized people get their lands back. With that, we appreciate you. We'll talk to you soon. Ashe, and be safe out there, you all. See you next week.